everybody doing today? You're in here with me? Another day. Joe, you can hop up here? Alright, I'm recruiting people, so. I know I throw this topic out here, I know some other people threw it out here. And really the reason for it is, like I did a presentation on where to start for automation. I had a lot of questions following it. And I figured why not just continue on the conversation. You know, I can kind of go through bits and pieces of it if you guys want to, if you hadn't seen it before, but if not, there's no sense of repeating everything as far as the visual side of it. But just for reference, if you don't know me, I'm Chris Hildebrand. I've done a lot of things in the community. I've done a lot of automation thing. I've done large enterprise automation of server infrastructure down to automating VDI. To the same point, I hate documentation, so I automated documentation. It just makes life easier. You know, I'd rather spend my time to do it once than never do it again. So, I'll let Joe.
Yeah, I'm Joe. So, I've been doing automation for a long time. I've got last year did a session on it and did some other sessions on automation.
I'm Daniel. I'm new to this, but my rule is always if I have to do it once, I should automate it because I don't want to do it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, from you guys, what would be your number one tip in just stepping into automation, working through that?
PowerShell. Look at PowerShell. The amount of things you can do with PowerShell, and like just kind of make PowerShell do all the clicks for you, because if anything can be done in the UI, it can probably be configured in PowerShell, so you can just do it faster in PowerShell and you can like loop it.
Yeah, kind of on that same line, like working primarily with Windows operating system. PowerShell is going to be that language of choice, right? In fact, not just stuff in the GUI, but there's a lot more stuff that can be configured or need to be configured through PowerShell command that you don't have access to. They haven't been exposed to a GUI, and that's more common with a lot of the third-party vendors.
So, for me, PowerShell has kind of been the key for it. Started off with simple things, but it's an extremely powerful tool. There are many others out there to use, but for me, most of us are using Windows, so it kind of makes sense.
I did want to add to that PowerShell thing. Once you've learned how to do something in PowerShell, you can easily extend that into another framework, right? So,
yes.
Say, take for example, Ansible, right? So sometimes Ansible might have native commands for doing what you want to do, but maybe it doesn't. Well, you can always just wrap what you're intending to do into a small PowerShell and inject it into that particular script.
Yeah, I'll use this one. How many of you guys actually automate things today? Richard, awesome. So, like, one of the hardest things that I came up with was, if you're not doing it, was stepping into it. And, you know, one of the challenges that I had was figuring out a use case for it. Like, for example, there's a good YouTube series called PowerShell A Month of Lunches. And for me, it helped me understand what the different modules and functions and features of PowerShell was to enable me to do stuff. The problem was I didn't have a use case for it. So I kept going, well, I'm just gonna click on this and do this and just follow this path because I wasn't comfortable enough and didn't feel confident enough for it. And this is kind of a oops for me, is there was this one time where a certain vendor was holding a competition of how many training modules you could take. So I knew how to do an HTTP request and open a browser tab on a machine. So I wrote a PowerShell script and I figured out how their web page numbering was for the modules and where the end of the training modules were and where they started back over again. So I wrote a simple PowerShell script, I think it was only like 6 lines, to open a new tab. Day 1, I was number 1 in the rankings of winning that competition. I think somebody else figured out my methodology. So the next day was Friday evening. I figured out, well, everybody's going home on Friday. I have like 400 company computers to use. Why not push it out to all of them? I got a call on Sunday that said the entire environment was broke. But I won. That's all that mattered. I exceeded everybody. But just finding the common use case to make your life easier has been just simple things to connect to it to make it useful. Yeah.
I was going to say, right now, I think most enterprises have a bunch of use cases sitting there that you can use. BBS is going away. You've got a lot of scripts out there that are going to need rewriting. Find keys on those.
100%.
Sometimes I don't think you need a use case to get started. But a lot of things, like configuring a server, configuring a workstation, you want to flip some buttons here or there. Well, let's go find out how could we do that programmatically, right? You have a lot of tools these days with Gemini and ChatGPT. You can go in and say, hey, how do I set the time zone on my computer using command prompt or PowerShell? And it'll come back and spit it out, and now you got yourself a one-liner on how to set time zone, right? So now you have that structure there, and then maybe you could start learning to extrapolate that. Well, maybe I could put the time zone itself into a variable, and then if I put it in a framework, it's like, hey, if I'm in this area, I'm in the Mountain Standard Time, and then that's your variable, and then when you go to execute it, now your server is now in Arizona time or Pacific time zone. Yeah.
The best way that I found to start with PowerShell was I just went into it trying to accomplish something. The very first time I think I used PowerShell was like when Office 365 first came out. There wasn't like a way to set the passwords to never expire, and everyone wanted that. But the only way to do it was to like connect to Exchange Online using PowerShell and set that specific setting. And then my eyes were kind of opened at like, what is this? I've never heard of this. And then if you enter, like, if you try to learn PowerShell by just reading all the documentation, it's not going to get you very far. But if you go into PowerShell going, I want to do such and such, like set the time zone, well, then you'll figure that out. Notice that there's variables, like when I have to configure an out of office, well, I don't want to do it all manually. I just have a PowerShell script that just says enter date, begin date, end date, and boom, it sets it for me. It's great.
Yeah. And like, as they're kind of alluding to, start with something small. Pick a single function, whether it's setting time, setting a time zone, setting an out of office flag, those things. Pick something simple, start with there. Test it, run it, learn how it works and functions, and then add a little piece onto it and just kind of keep growing. And it's kind of like a bug or a virus that you catch and you just keep going and going. And it's what makes my life easy.
Using that same logic is how I accidentally taught myself Python, because I had a vendor that changed a URL in a script, and I had a bunch of I didn't know about PowerShell functions yet, and I had a bunch of antivirus install scripts. There was like 100 of them, and I needed to change the URL, but like trying to get a PowerShell script to write a PowerShell script, it's I couldn't figure out how to do it, but then I heard everyone's talking about Python, so I figured out how to open a CSV file as like a read-only file. Then I had all my variables in there, and it just grabbed a text file that had my PowerShell script and just dumped it all out in like 5 minutes. Once I figured out the hours of figuring out how Python worked, but I could run it in 5 minutes and spat out like 100 plus scripts. And that's how I learned Python. You just learn.
Yes.
To kind of build on that, and one of the things I think Daniel did a really good job in his presentation previously as well is like, don't feel like you have to figure out everything about PowerShell or everything about Python before you do something useful. Like start doing the useful things, and then as you need more functionality or you need to solve a new problem, then add in those additional things that you're putting back together.
Your script will never be perfect, and it's fine.
Yes.
You get better at it. So just don't be afraid. How many people here deal with like master images for the environment, right? Or app layering or app packaging and stuff? Because I found out that's actually a really great place to start learning and to start automating. Because there's a few things. We'll start with the app packaging, right? So there's some things you want to have done into your capture machine before. Maybe there's some prereqs that you want to have done before the capture starts. And then I like to build a little script that actually does a silent install of the application, does any configurations that need to be inside of that package. And that way it's repeatable because, hey, if it's something that we gotta do some kind of app packaging or app loading for, the chances are we're having to do this frequently because the application gets updated weekly or bi-weekly or, often enough that we're wanting to package this app, so it's worth it to kind of script that application so that we can easily repackage, maybe even throw that into an automation script where we can package multiple things at one time. And it's a repeatable process. It's also documented. One of the places I went into, they had 17 different VDI desktops, and nobody knew how to install most of the applications that were in there. So again, we reverse engineered, but not only reverse engineered it, scripted it all out. So every app had a block of code that said, here's how you install it from a PowerShell perspective, right? So you have to, be able to read that, but somebody who knows PowerShell is like, oh, this is how the application is installed and configured. And I can repeat that process, and somebody else can come along and they don't have to reverse engineer the application install. They just have to understand how the script is executed.
Yes, and that's a very good point, especially on the documentation side. It is an automated documentation because you're writing it out, and it is line by line documentation of how to do said thing.
And that's kind of what I tell people to go next, right? Just like, okay, you learn how to do individual configuration settings, whether it be for an application or for the OS or something of that sort. And those are a bunch of little one-liners. You start to build that out. Then you start building out script for installing applications, right? When we start getting into, we can start building onto that complexity and get into the master image, and we could start learning to automate Windows updates and application updates, Chrome, Edge, all that stuff. But we also need to reseal the operating system sometimes, right? We have applications that have unique IDs that need to be scrubbed before that master image gets pushed out. We have antivirus updates that we want to go grab and download and make sure those are installed. We want to maybe even do some verification. So like some of the things I do, not to do the installation, we also verify things, right? Is this the latest version of Edge that I can find? Is this the latest version of Chrome? I have validation scripts too that can run and validate that certain things are what they should be before I send this image out.
Yep.
I don't have master images. I still deal with VDI the wrong way, where it's persistent VDIs and I manage it with Intune, and I deal with a lot of physical. So I can't really comment on that.
Why not? Because I think
It's the same thing.
It would be even better if you could be to push out updates of application two using some kind of ESP tool or.
Well, so because everything's managed with Intune, the way that I'm doing everything is all of the installation scripts for Intune are just PowerShell scripts that point to a short URL that I can control, so then I can just edit that whenever I need to push a new version and just change the version detection inside of Intune. And because I also work in a managed service provider, we have this deployed across a bunch of different customers, and then rather than repackaging every Intune update, I just change a variable, or I just update the short link, and then I change the app detection inside of Intune, click a button, and 24 or 48 hours later, all the devices are just magically updated.
Somebody got to know Intune back.
I did. Yeah, I just wrote the PowerShell script, and I created this thing called the installation matrix, which is just a collection of all my different PowerShell scripts that will install the application. So you just package one PowerShell script that uses all the functions you need, and then it uses a short URL, and then you edit that, and it just pushes the update. Oh yeah, I do lots of scripting. But not with like master images and VDI in that sense. I'm doing VDI wrong.
It's all good.
Well, it's available. I mean, you see a lot of people when they're going in the cloud, they go more persistent than non-persistent. I do like the non-persistent model. It's great, but not everybody can handle that. Not every application is being written. I mean, some of these applications, they want a machine identity, but then they want to store all that stuff into a user app data location. And you get some of these really weird applications that just don't want to play nice. You try to package them, they don't want to play nice with packaging. You want to create a non-persistent image. It can take a little bit of work. It can be done, but it just takes a lot more expertise to do that. Where if your organization doesn't have the necessary skill set to support something like that, then you kind of will evolve back to doing persistent images across the board, and then every so often you have a new master that you're going to use and just wipe out the persistence and start over again as needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
That brings up other things on that one is, you can go into automation of controlling, auto provisioning the VMs for persistent machines. You can jump into tearing them down to the same way. Hey, when user gets deactivated from Active Directory, just go ahead and tear them down. It's an easy automation process. My presentation yesterday was actually on the steps involved in updating or expanding OS disk. As you talked, we go through, hey, where do you start on this one? Is breaking down the steps into the smallest things possible and pasting them all together. Whether it's detect that the disk is low, log in the hypervisor, expand the disk, disconnect, and then log in the OS, expand the disk, disconnect. And that's a simplistic method, and you can make it much more complex to meet your needs as you kind of grow through it, but it's just breaking those down. And there's so many options out there that you can use as use cases that benefit you in every organization across the board. It's just stepping up to it and running with it. Another really good use case for non-persistent is like if you have a large call center with large turnover or things like that with large turnover, one of the big things that people always forget about, user profile data. Oh, we deleted user in Active Directory, but 2 years down the road, who's B. Thompson? They haven't worked here for years. Why is their profile still here? Simple little thing to check, hey, if it's in Active Directory, then keep it. If it's not, delete it. Simplistic little things like that instead of paying somebody to go line by line through Active Directory going, who's B. Thompson? Let me go find it. Working through those things. Questions? This is an interactive thing, so we want to get people involved. And
It doesn't necessarily have to be about building and configuring too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's automating the workflows, certain things that need to happen on a day-to-day basis, general maintenance, testing and validation. Like we're starting getting more back into testing and validation. So when an image gets updated, for maybe just a simple low-risk Windows update for the month, it goes to the next staging environment, and it goes through a series of automated testing just to make sure some of the line of business apps are working as expected before they move to, say, QA or prod stage. The other thing is starting to maybe automate the image management from one state to the next.
Yes.
Right. So you may be doing a bunch of stuff in test, and when you're ready, that test can go to QA, then QA to prod. Right now, it's not a lot of manual work, but it is manual work. And we can automate a lot of that stuff, and sometimes people make mistakes because different people are maybe involved in moving the image from one state to the next. And if they get the wrong snapshot name, then you may be putting the wrong image from QA into prod.
Yeah, very much
Little
so.
things like that. So automation helps reduce some of those risks.
It gives you ability to add some accountability to it too. Like one of the things that I did in a previous life was adding user acceptance into new master images or updates as you work through it. Starting to combine tools together, like using Power Automate to having a set of test users and have the Power Automate portion of it to control how that's deployed. And if user accepts it and they say, yes, we accept it via like a Power Automate email or whatever along that line, and everybody agrees upon it, then it goes into production on its own. And that's high inside of it, but you can start combining tools later on as you develop in your world and make life easy for various things like that.
And automating doesn't always have to be PowerShell. Like there's something that we've configured is within Office 365 you can like restrict logins and like block Canada or block the rest of the world from being able to, I'm in Canada, so block the rest of the world from being able to log in and only allow Canada to log in. But then normally what you would do is you create like a security group and toss your traveling users into there. But then the biggest problem is remembering to remove the users. But then there's ways that you can do things. If you have like Entra P2, you can actually create like an access package and then have it so your users can actually like request their own access. And you can even have an approval process. Once they do that, it will then put them into like an exclusion group that removes them out of blocking all logins other than Canada, and makes it so that when the user enters the start and end date, it will just put them in the group and allow them to log in from wherever they happen to be going. And you just automate that and remove the human factor of forgetting things.
Yeah. I had the conversation in the hallway about the user problem in persistently clicking through things. The biggest problem with, we were talking through image automation, the biggest problem with doing anything in like an image build or any building process is the steps always change. From user to user doing it. So you can have internal documentation that says do 1, 2, 3, 4, but user forgot that they didn't do 3 and went ahead and did 4, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, I need to do 3 after that. Is there any consequences of doing that before or after? I don't know. Do you know? Nobody probably knows until you test it, and it may not be immediate, it may be down the road. So, that documentation / automation process allows you to do repeatable steps across the board. And it's not so much on other things, but like image build process, installing Office after updates. What does that affect? Or installing Office before updates. What's a better solution? But what's a more consistent one? So, and just making sure it's repeatable across the board is the biggest thing. Because we're all users, we all make errors, we all get distracted, squirrel goes by, then we're lost for a good hour.
Squirrel?
Sometimes with automation, you gain access to things that don't things that you're not supposed to have access to. So what I mean by that is if you have Entra P1 license, technically speaking, you've been exposed the risky sign-in APIs, but you don't get the fancy weekly report from Microsoft. But if you automate getting a report by just actually querying the APIs, you can build your own report that will email you on a set schedule of all your risky sign-ins without having to wait for Microsoft to send their weekly email. And little things like that, where it's like as soon as you have P1, you can do it even though you're supposed to have P2. You should probably have P2.
Cheating the system.
Is it cheating if they let you?
No. Shouldn't expose the APIs.
There you go.
Yeah.
The other thing that we also automated because it was the bane of our existence is having to deal with auditors and disabling an account as a very specific, like end of day, and wanting it to be actioned immediately. Well, if you disable an account in AD, you can schedule that, but it doesn't, or you can schedule the account to have an expiry, but an expired account is not a disabled account in 365. So we created a PowerShell script that will query all of AD, and it runs at midnight 30 because an expired account expires on midnight. So if you run it at midnight 30, it will just hunt for all the expired accounts and just flip it to disabled. And then there's a script that will send an email saying, these are the accounts I disabled. And then this way, auditors are happy because the account was disabled within 30 minutes of the whatever HR said that they had to be terminated by. And you didn't have to wake up at midnight.
I want that script.
I'll sell it to you, $20.
Done.
Canadian.
Oh,
So like $5.
Oh, okay, $3.
It's a sweet script. I'll put it on GitHub.
Yeah. And that also brings up another thing, the community is full of various scripts for various tools across the board. Some of them are perfect. Like, I've never been shy about throwing out all my previous scripts, leaving them unchanged, because that shows how I learned and evolved in my coding. Because we all make mistakes to begin with. Some of it's ugly, really ugly. Sometimes I question how I actually did some of it and how it actually worked, but it worked. To be fair. So, like you and your presentation about understanding functions, it's part of it. It's an ever evolving process. There'll always be a better way or more efficient way or whatever. It's figuring it out. What's the fun challenge of it all?
Well, Tim just told me that I can make PowerShell modules by doing PS1M, and I didn't know that, so now I gotta go learn that and figure out how I can just do that now. I didn't know that. I didn't know about functions 4 years ago. So
Yeah.
everything was just very granular, line by line.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to learn about modules too. As I explained documentation, there's a product called, or a open source framework. It's called as-built reports, where it's originally started off as a vSphere thing. I saw it at VMworld 1 year. I happened to go speak in Australia. I met the guys that created it, and I'm like, how can I be part of this, because this is freaking awesome. And anyways, so I actually ended up writing it for the entirety of Horizon. But to your point, I had to learn a lot of different things into it because because of it was written on a framework with modules and functions built into it. It actually forced me to learn Git too, which I didn't know before. It was a huge learning experience for me as a whole. And then maintaining it, updating it, and it's not only for that, but literally you can document most of your environment.
The thing too is just like starting the user disablement script. In order to figure it out, I just kind of broke it down line by line. It's like, okay, can I query user accounts that are in an expired state? Okay, yes, great. Now can I just store this as a variable or something? I don't remember exactly what I did. I wrote the script a while ago, but let's pretend I store it as a variable. Okay, great. Now what can I do with this variable? Am I able to alter the user account? Yes. Okay, great. So if I find that it matches this value, then what can I do with it next? Then break it down and go, okay, so now I know what the account is that I can find an expired account. Now I can store that as a value of the SAM user. Then if I move on and go, okay, now with that stored, or because there's a possibility that it could be more than one account, I have to for each loop it so that it itemizes or it iterates for each item it finds. Then I can action that specific item, but what I'm doing, because I wasn't sure if my iteration in my for each was working properly, I just did a bunch of write host so that I know what would you actually do rather than running it. And the other great thing with a ton of PowerShell modules is you can do the what if command where it will tell you what it would have done if you didn't have what if at the end of it. So it can also remove less of the fear. And once I had figured out that, okay, I can disable the account, great, it's going to be super verbose so that I know what my script is doing. And then I go, great, now I want an email to do that. Well, there's another script that was already doing emails for the risky sign-ins, so I just can copy that, but then I have to solve for, this is still something I have to fix, where every time it runs, it generates a 0 kilobyte file, even though, because it generates a log file regardless, which is annoying, but only when the file has, content in it will it actually email me. But I need to figure out how to make it not generate the log file, but it's always evolving.
Yes?
Yeah, so I used to teach PowerShell to folks that were in our classes, right, going back a few years ago, because they're really coming in not knowing it. And what I find today is they pretty much know the basics on PowerShell. The one piece that I still end up talking to them about, but most of them aren't familiar enough with it, is the power of the get module command. So as you get output from PowerShell as an actual object, you pipe that into get module, and you can see not only the properties that are there, but often there are some methods there. Sometimes that's the only way to get something done, particularly if a vendor has provided that initial module and produced that thing. Then they have some methods in there that you can run against the object to then do that next step thing you have to do. Very, very easy.
Yes, very much so.
And sometimes you have to be creative because sometimes the output of whatever the thing that you're getting is like a string, but you need it to not be a string, so you have to get creative in setting it a few different ways to make it a different kind of value that's not a string. I don't remember how I fixed that, but there was one time where I'd sent it through a few pipes to get it into a format I could use.
Yeah. Or the numbers that show up as strings you need to save as an integer. Anybody have anything that they specifically kind of want to go over? This is, yeah.
Do you have any comments on using Ansible with Windows automation? Because it's not really compatible, at least because we are using PowerShell and then Ansible automation.
So about using Ansible and PowerShell on Windows. That's a you question all day long.
Well, I heard Ansible and PowerShell, but that's not all I heard.
Yeah. You want to speak up?
I'm deaf, so it's fine to hear anyway. So, what was the question again?
Yeah, basically, do you have any experience of automating Ansible or using Ansible in the stateful configuration of Ansible, but using PowerShell in the end because we are administrating Windows systems?
So to make
You can put it on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think Ansible uses PowerShell.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a win shell command. So when you YAML file, there's a a wind shell command, you can just cut and paste your PowerShell command in there. I mean, I can show you how to do it. I have to crack it open, but yeah, you can send PowerShell commands. And in fact, there's some things you can't do in Ansible, so you do send a little script block to the whatever it is you're trying to configure. Like in this case, I have a bunch of stuff that configured that takes the secondary disk that I see and it formats it, gives it a drive letter, label, that kind of stuff. Ansible doesn't deal with any of that stuff on the hardware side, so I got PowerShell script that do that.
You can Ansible variable and then parse that to PowerShell, so PowerShell uses the same variable.
Yeah, you just have to register things. Because each task is kind of self-contained, but you can move stuff by registering a variable at the end of your task, and then you can reuse the variables. But it depends on like if you're trying to go from module to module, but you have a very layered, I want to say layered sense for variables, where you can pipe in variables based on the machine name, based off of everybody gets these variables. The different ways you can inject variables at different layers, so that if you have one variable here, you have an order of precedence, right? So if I define a variable at this level, then it takes precedence over the all, right? So all becomes kind of the default, whereas you can get into roles and other things that they can define variable to. So if you define it there, that's the variable, but then you can override it later in. So in your actual playbook, you can define even more variables, right, at the top of your playbook, and those will be the override anything that's in the computer YAML file or all YAML file. And then if you get into the individual task, you can define variables in there, and then those will override what you have in your playbook. So you can set different layers. It can get pretty complex pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can pipe. You can definitely pipe. It's just the easiest way to do the mustache. Are you familiar with the mustache? You just inject that in. So in your PowerShell script, you can put in the mustaches, which is kind of like in the old command prompt 8% variable percent.
Yeah.
Right, kind of like that. But in this it's the two squigglies and open and two squigglies to close, and your variable in the middle.
Okay. Anybody else? Kind of hear down with you guys. Yeah.
Question, I don't know if it's gonna apply to you, Joe, I'm not sure about the last person, but when you're at a enterprise space or whatever, IT department where you're paying it, where you got this or something that you've seen where you kind of become the only person and that like how to bid standard or whatever. Let's say I'm flying here and I went to Terraform or whatever, right? It's a single thread of me for a moment, but getting that out so that you're not the only person 18 months down the road that's still, you're saying Terraform or Ansible or whatever. And we've seen that before, right? You have a departure and you look at this thing and you're, holy crap, this is going to see the server in this thing, right? Kind of thing. Just any best practices for putting together run across the parts, trying to get past A to each all the time.
So the question is, how do you get past you being a single knowledge? Yeah. Single developer for code is a simplistic way of, and so to be fair, as I've stepped into enterprises and been part of enterprises that ironically I've been in that situation on the enterprise side, not having team members that understand it to the length that I did was rough. I left my last enterprise job. My manager actually said I needed to go fly down to meet him and flew some of my coworkers down so I could go through some PowerShell codes that were actually running the environment line by line and explain it to people. I felt terrible about that, but that's what we had to do. But to that point is picking common technologies across the board picking things that are familiar with other people, but also encouraging your coworkers to do the same mentality. Helping them, encouraging them, pushing them to do the same things, to understand those technologies. And especially as a consultant, it's a little rougher because you're there on their dime helping them, when sometimes they're just like, oh, just give me a script and I'll call you when it breaks. Well, we're not always around. We may have another customer working on in that thing, and having to explain that to a customer, they need to learn and understand that and help them work through it and help them troubleshoot it. It's hard. I don't have a good answer for that part of it, unfortunately. But from what I've seen, that's kind of been the mentality that I've had to deal with, is limiting as much as possible, but also encouraging as much as possible. Just being a good judge of who you're working with and their skill set. Yeah.
What I try to do is put in code comments. And then the other thing is, I have a coworker that very much is into PowerShell, so I get them to read through the script and be like, is there anything that could be improved, anything would be different? And it's my evil tactics to make sure that they understand what the script is. The other thing that I also sometimes will do is a lot of the stuff, I don't consider proprietary. I'll strip out company-specific information and then probably write a blog post that's like, here's how I'm going to do this. The AD account disablement script, it's on my list of things to do, is to generalize it so it can be used in any environment, and then just put it on GitHub and do a blog post where it's like, here, go read this doc, and this is how it functions. It's not the perfect solution, not everyone has a blog, but all the scripts have basic comments where it's like, this is the loop, enumerating each user, and it's just having those comments where even someone that doesn't fully understand PowerShell should be able to read the code comments and kind of figure it out a little bit. But that's what I've done.
Chris, in that example you're talking about where folks were having to get together to do some knowledge transfer, and thinking back to the earlier comments about the scripts serving as documentation, if you hadn't scripted and automated that, would there, I feel like there probably would have had to have been an equal amount of knowledge transfer, just here's the things I'm doing manually on an ongoing basis. Was there any more familiarity with that methodology versus familiarity with what you were automating?
So to some extent, yes, but to some extent, no, because, for example, I was dealing with a coworker that had never actually used PowerShell other than where they had Googled and said, hey, they need to run this command to do this various thing. So understanding functions and features was rough. But to Dan's point, I praise myself for being over documentative on different commands and how they function and what they do. Even more so now that there's Copilot for VS Code, and I can tell it to do all my documentation for me, then I don't have to do it. It's that part that's hard to get over. It's in code, it's not in a Word document. And it doesn't have pretty pictures.
And putting comments in your code is great because in 6 months, if you have to relook at that script, you may not remember what you were thinking at that time. And if you have comments, maybe you can kind of re-jog your memory and be like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking. I don't know why I was thinking that. I have a better way to do it now, but that's a tactic I do.
Every time I look at my code.
It's like, who wrote this? Oh, it was me.
Man, what idiot wrote this? Oh, that was me.
It's got the base 64 encoding figured out in PowerShell, so you can put your pictures in your comments.
Yeah.
Base 64, everything.
I'm very bad at documenting. I hate inline coding, inline commenting and stuff like that. It just messes with the eye trying to follow the flow of the code, and then also I got all color changes and comments I have to skip over, and I want as much code on the screen at one time that I can scan through before I have to scroll through. And if I got a ton of comments in there, and everybody gets creative with their blocks and comment blocks and stuff, and then I get 3 lines here, and I got to scan down here, and 3 more lines down here, and So I don't know. For me, it's if I'm going to give it to somebody else, yeah, I'll throw in a bunch of documentation on the side. But I hate inline comments. I don't know. That's a personal preference. I also hate it when people that put extra spaces. You put a script block in there, and then you have your closing brackets, and then they put extra spaces and stuff in there. It's like sometimes if you just got one line, like an if then else and one line, just put it on one line and put your script block right there at the end of the if statement, as opposed to, okay, let me do an opening bracket, another line, then my code, another blank line, and then a closing bracket. So now I've got 5 lines of code I have to read just to do one little thing. And it's like, I want it more concise, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And for that specific side of it, it just depends on how long that bit of code or function
If
is.
it's gonna take more than one line of thing, then yeah, I'll break it out for a little bit more human readable, but, putting spaces between everything and not condensing it,
Yeah.
or beautifying it. I like the beautification of it. That makes it more readable. Sometimes I'll actually do, like if you do in a section that defining all the variables, all the equal signs will line up so that your variables on one side, your values on the other, as opposed to variable space equal space your value, right? You might beautify that so that all your equals line up, so all the values are aligned here, and all the variables are aligned there. Little things like that make it more readable.
I completely get where Joe's going, and engineer Mike was like that, and I'll go with a little bit of laziness. Leader Mike needs the team to put the comments of what they're doing in the code, because I got a 95% more likelihood of them updating the code there than going out into Confluence or a Word document and updating it somewhere else, right? Like they're in the code, I jumped in to make a modification, and I'll forget it. 6 months later, somebody's like, why is this in here?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason why I comment. It's not necessarily for me, except for, like he is pointing out, of figuring out what my state of mind was at the time that I wrote said piece of code. But it's more for getting coworkers, other people, because a lot of things that I write, I just throw up on GitHub, and I need other people to understand what I was doing and trust the code that I wrote, not just run it blindly because I said it did said thing.
Yeah, if you're gonna document, I like to do it like right before the function. Like if you're building a function, you build it out, you describe it and stuff like that. But inside the function, where the actual code is, I just don't like inline comments.
Yeah,
think
I get it.
Because then you can, if you need to read it, it's there for you to read and pass on. But then it's easy enough to script and you just skip, and then you can go down to what actual code is and deal with the code, right? As opposed to the comments in between.
Yep.
Well, yes, but if I have, let's say, hash tables, erasing hash tables and all that stuff, then I sometimes have actually also an example what that code really does and how to read it, because sometimes you even forget yourself after 3 months what craziness you have come up with, just to make it, let's say, in that case, really nice and fluid from a flow from the objects and the hash tables. But if you then get, let's say, self-confused with index 1, index 2, what isn't, so that I always have in the command right next to the code, because that's not a description of, let's say, the executive summary function.
I get where you're coming from.
What?
I get where you're coming from. But, a lot of times I'm going down
Less readable, yes.
Right? And if I'm writing code, a lot of times for myself or an organization, if I'm writing it for other people or an organization, then the code itself needs to be very readable as well. So if you're just trying to put a bunch of pipelines in there and expecting somebody to understand how the whole pipeline works, yeah, you kind of need something like that, but then are you even doing it correctly? Are you using proper variable names that kind of describe what the variable is, as opposed to, hey, $A equal this, $B equal this, $C, you know, and then for...
That's the whole concept, because if you ever have seen some where I always try to recursive regular expressions,
Yeah.
this is where I always fall them again.
Something that works at scale, invest in a doc harness, right? So when you're writing code, format out to like a markdown link and write a doc harness in your CI/CD pipeline that will just go pick up those breadcrumbs and then generate the markdown for you. So when you're reading through the code, you'll have like, if you have a complex hash table or some sort of computation that you want to document separately, rather than writing a thesis on this is what this is doing, you can link out to a markdown document that stores all of that in the same repository, and you just use a linting harness to pick it up when you commit the code, and it goes and writes the document for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if that section is too complicated to kind of read through, maybe it's too complicated to read through, you need to break it out and simplify some of that. But I personally think you should be able to read through the code and understand it.
I agree. All right.
You can also automate weird things. A coworker of mine, in managed service provider space, you get a lot of emails. So a coworker of mine was using Outlook rules, but he had a macro that you had to like force Outlook to have enabled, and basically the macro would just run an Outlook rule. And the problem is with like new Outlook, when we're all forced to use that at some point, well, macros don't really work in there. So I really liked the concept, but I hated having to fight Outlook to allow me to run this macro that would just execute an Outlook rule. So I got annoyed by that, and then was reading in Microsoft documentation to try to see if I could trigger a rule on demand somehow through like Connect Exchange Online or something like that. And I didn't find a way to do that, but I did find a way that I could rebuild a rule and just have it as a PowerShell command. And I created a script that basically loads everything I need to load and then executes a bunch of rules that will just categorize all my emails for me. So when I have 1,000 unread emails, I just run the script. It just moves my emails where I need to put them, and everything is good. And it works without Outlook even being open, so it don't need macros. It just hooks into Exchange Online and just runs as an Entra app, and with like delegate permissions, and just works across everything. Automate all the things.
Well, yeah, might as well. All right, well, nobody else has got anything? All right, well, I appreciate everybody. Kind of let you be.